everyone, welcome to this paper. This paper is going to be about the rebuilding of the Manchester's LGBT plus centre, which is managed by the Proud Trust, an LGBT charity. My name's Emily Crompton. I'm a senior lecturer at Manchester School of Architecture. I've been involved in this project for the past 6 years, first as a volunteer researcher, then an architect, and now as a researcher. I'm pleased to be presenting this paper with two others. Amelia Lee, the Strategic Director for the Proud Trust, who's been one of the main staff members working on the project, and Charlie Lee, who attends one of the youth groups at the centre. He's studying English and Creative Writing at the University of Manchester and won a prize for public speaking about the centre's redesign in 2019. It's important to note before we start our presentation that all other similar community centres for LGBT groups in the UK reappropriate existing buildings or make use of generic community spaces. This presentation demonstrates how important physical space is to marginalised communities, accepting fully that architecture is constituted through occupation, while demanding a space designed specifically for the LGBT community. We will interweave our voices to emphasise the range of different voices present during the process. First, we'll speak about the original 1980s design, then about the process of redesign, and then the new buildings architecture as well.
The Proud Trust is a life-saving and life-changing youth and community work organisation. We deliver groups one-to-one support and training. I first came across the Gay Centre, as it was known, in 2003 when I arrived on a dark and rainy night to a volunteer open day. I remember the feeling of it being like a rundown community centre, but the atmosphere, due to the people, made it somewhere I wanted to get involved with, and I've never looked back.
So my partner used to attend the youth group here when she was a teenager many years ago, but she later became a trustee of the charity. And whenever I visited for events or eating at the cafe, it always seemed to me that the building was held together with sticky tape and glitter. There was stuff everywhere, no natural daylight, a tin roof which was so noisy when it rained and made it hugely hot in the summer.
Yeah, my first experience at the Proud Trust Centre was also a youth group. I was very excited about it since I'd never seen another trans person in the wild before. To me, it looked more like a detention centre than a youth club, and I almost concluded that the entrance must be the back entrance. And I was about to leave when someone else rocked up and showed me how to get in. I sometimes do wonder how many other people have been in this exact position and ended up leaving and missed out on what could have been the most formative space of their lives.
So I was researching the centre's history and I found a really interesting story of defiant and determined staff and volunteers who campaigned over 10 years in the 1980s to build a permanent home for their community and activist work. The organisation had outgrown the basement they previously inhabited, and the new building that you can see here in an 80s magazine was fully funded by the local authority money. It was built on council-owned land and it was designed by a local authority architect. This really could have only happened in Manchester in the 1980s. One key figure in getting the centre built was Paul Fairweather, who was one of the first gay men's officers employed by the City Council. And he noted, "There's something about Manchester, combination of a very strong LGBT community, the gay village on Canal Street, and a very supportive council." The building opened in November 1988. It hosted phone lines and social groups. Next, Charlie's going to talk about the design of the centre.
Yes, the design of the building is very inconspicuous, blending in with the surrounding buildings thanks to being built with similar materials and in a similar style. So at one glance, the centre could easily be mistook for an office block or any other nondescript establishment. However, the architect designed the building with nods to a postmodernism style of rejecting traditional architectural doctrines, perhaps fitting for a centre of a group that then defied societal norms and social doctrines. As you can tell from the spiked fence of the and the airlock-like entrance, this was not a place built with modern ideas of pride in mind, but with practical safety measures needed for the 1980s. Protesters, arsonists, the building had even been described as bomb-proof and had panic buttons in each room should a disaster occur. which shows that the threat of homophobic violence was felt even in spaces literally built to be safe.
The Conservative government put in place a homophobic law in 1988, the very year the building was built, called Section 28. This stated that no public funded organisation, such as a local council, could, I quote, promote homosexuality as a pretend family relationship, end quote. So these safety measures were not a flashy or bold architectural statement, but reflected a fear that society was going to become more hostile to lesbian and gay people. They were necessary decisions to make for the safety of the centre's users, keeping the groups anonymous. At first, the purpose of the centre was a gay men's helpline and condom distribution service, but they were also founding people and groups that met at the centre representing LGBT women and also trans people from the outset.
So the successful campaigning for the centre demonstrates some acceptance of the community, but the location being outside that gay village and the design of the centre epitomise this need for anonymity for certain members of this community. So the design of the 80s centre reflects this prejudice experienced by the LGBT community at the time. For example, this photo here shows how the windows are placed above head height so no one could look in. This is an early version of the architect's plans for the original centre. I'll just bring up a laser so you can have a see of this. While the plan is extremely functional, there is a sensitivity to the cafe being placed at the heart of the plan, with support services such as phone lines and offices wrapping a protective layer around it, with the main social space at the back of the building away from the main entrance, which, as Charlie described, is airlock type in design, with one door to come in and then a reception desk to looking at this mirror over here to check who was coming in and who was entering the building.
One room which reveals how the centre and the Proud Trust operates is the library. In the plan, it's denoted as an office, and while it may have been called a consulting room or a counselling space in other organisations, the Proud Trust know that many LGBT people have been stigmatised through mental health and clinical settings. So by calling the space a library and people getting help from others in the community instead of professionals, this enables people to feel empowered. It's a quiet space to escape from the main group sometimes, and it helps people to have somewhere to go for a moment alone or a quiet conversation.
The library also literally functioned as a library with books about LGBT identity, history, and politics for people to access for free at the centre. The library also more informally functioned as a zine library and now stores around 3 decades of local history in written form.
So how do you develop a brief to design or to redesign this building? Well, through hundreds of conversations. An initial workshop was held about the hopes and fears for the future of the centre. This started a 4-year briefing and design process. A building that was thought of so fondly required this gentle approach.
Part of this design process was considering lots of different ideas for the purpose of the building, such as a school, supported housing, or a mezzanine level in the current building. Over 600 people were consulted, as well as expert help to work out the feasibility of each option. Design and participation entwined at each stage, and we kept returning back to the question of who the space is for.
We eventually created a brief that had support from all sides, and the decision to demolish the existing centre was taken with a heavy heart. But available funding also played a really important part in understanding the limits of the project. The project embodies this idea of spatial agency, from informal research to more formalised workshops, conversations helped gather a momentum, and young people, staff and different user groups all helped to bring ideas for the building together. One particular challenge for the architectural language was how to combine contrasting requirements of being a building to be proud of, as well as maintaining some anonymity. The external appearance garnered lots of debate, but in a similar way to the anonymous bricks of the 1980s building, then blending in with its surroundings. The solution of a gold exterior helped this building fit into its new surroundings of new and refurbished university buildings which surround the site. This gives it an anonymous nod, but also allows it to be seen as special and precious.
As a charity, we'd never built a building before and may not build one again. So it was a really steep learning curve for us. As a client, we learnt about things like what a design team was, what a project manager did, how to calculate tax efficiency, how to run a tender process for a building contractor, what the membership and purpose of a building board should be. So there was a lot to learn.
Yeah, I remember being asked for input on the new building in a group session. We had to say what we wanted to keep or throw away. And I vividly remember everyone happily kicking the uncomfortable weird chair we had to sit on out, but doubling down on keeping all our homemade arts and crafts decorations, such as the iconic bottle cap Angela Davies painting you can see in that picture over there.
So the new centre is 3 stories tall. This is the ground floor plan. The main space is given over to a much larger cafe and kitchen. The cafe has fully glazed windows that can be fully opened on a nice day, and then a smaller meeting room at the back. The lobby allows 2 groups to meet simultaneously, one going upstairs and one going into the meeting room downstairs. The toilets are all gender neutral, single cubicles, as was required by the brief.
Importantly, the library will still be a feature of the new building in its original form, with some of the same furniture even. Some people have described this as an anchor that people can retreat to for coping with the huge changes to the space. But it is also now a time capsule with history embedded both in the books on the walls and in the walls themselves. So even though the building is being improved and changed, it also reflects the community's need to always remember their roots.
So in order for the new centre to be built, the old building had to be demolished. And this was marked with a series of events, including a festival, people writing love letters to the building, recording memories, and a tour ending in the empty building. We wanted to emphasise a notion that the building is so much more than its rooms. So a photographic study was undertaken in the months before demolition. It documented the activities and groups that occupied the building with such life, some of which you can see on screen. The contrast to the empty building is stark.
On the 20th of November 2019, the centre was reopened for the final time before closing for its demolition, which gave us all a chance to say goodbye. And looking at this monumental historic building completely stripped bare of all its displays and posters was incredibly emotional. As it's not just the physical appearance and makeup of a building that matters, it's what people do with it, the lived-in feeling created by real experiences of people and how they make a space truly theirs. With this sense of something being for you when everything else isn't, being what those activists in the 1980s originally strove for. Standing in the empty building, as we were saying our final goodbyes, the person next to me said that it feels like I grew up here. I responded, and now it's growing up with you. The pandemic hit a few months after the building's closure, and during lockdown, both the importance of physical space and the privilege of being able to enjoy one have been highlighted. Youth groups and associated activities have continued virtually during the pandemic, and as a result, disabled people, people who moved to other cities, and those unable to afford to go to a city centre were able to join in. So while the need for physical safe spaces is keenly felt, we will continue having virtual groups to ensure access for disabled groups and others.
So what now? Since we first started planning the building, the world has changed, not just with COVID, but also other changes like the rise in trans visibility. Fortunately, we built the space for maximum flexibility, so we can run digital help services, socially distanced groups, and adapt our cafe and meeting spaces for the needs of the community now and in the future.
The building is about a month away from completion. Walking around last week, the building really has grown up. 3 whole stories of community space. It's a generous building. The windows are large, the corridors are spacious, and the exterior, well, it glistens in the sun. Of course, it will take some time for the groups to get accustomed to their new building, but I don't doubt it won't be long before the crafts start going up and it feels like their space again. Thank you very much for listening.